struggle with diarrhoea, bloating, or trouble digesting fatty meals, your bile could be part of the problem. Bile isn't just about breaking down fats, it also plays a key role in our digestion and overall gut health. But when it doesn't work properly, it can trigger major digestive issues, including bile acid malabsorption, which is very similar in symptoms to IBS-D. In this episode, I'm going to explain how bile works, what happens when it goes wrong, and why that matters if you've been diagnosed with IBS. I'm going to talk about sluggish bile flow as well, and how menopause and certain supplements can affect bile production. Welcome to episode 91 of the Inside Knowledge podcast for people with IBS. I'm Anna Mapson. I've been meaning to do an episode about bile for absolutely ages. I did episode 52 a little while ago, which was all about bile acid malabsorption, and in there I spoke a bit about bile, but I wanted to cover a little bit more about the other side of bile, which is kind of more of a slow moving bile. If you've got IBS, it's definitely worth listening. A quick recap for those who haven't heard episode 52 or you just forgotten. Bile is made in our liver, it's stored in the gallbladder, and then as we eat it is released into the small intestine, and it helps us emulsify our fats so that we can better absorb them. This helps us get good nutrients out. It helps us absorb fat soluble vitamins like vitamin A, E, D and K, and it's just also an antimicrobial substance that helps to clean the small intestine. So problems with bile flow can lead to problems with digesting your food, so you're getting too much fat that's left in the small intestine, in the waste, and then that can speed up your transit time and cause diarrhea. It can also lead to malabsorption of your nutrients if you're constantly getting diarrhea, food's moving through you very quickly. And it can also be one of the potential causes of small intestine bacterial overgrowth, because without that antimicrobial wash that happens with the migrating motor complex when you're not eating, then you're going to have a possibility of more bacteria and other microbes growing in your small intestine. And we know people who've got SIBO get diarrhea, very bad bloating, pain, and a whole host of other symptoms, which again are very similar to IBS. So I wanted to do this episode just to explain a little bit about bile and how it works, so that you can have a think about how it might be affecting your digestive symptoms. The quick recap for bile acid malabsorption is just to remind you, so as those bile salts are released into the small intestine, they help us dissolve the fats, make them smaller so they can be better absorbed into our cells and get to use in the body. But then the bile salts travel with the food to the end of the small intestine. It's called the terminal ileum, right at the end before we get to the large intestine. And those bile salts are reabsorbed through the bloodstream. They go back to the liver to be recycled. And normally somewhere around 95% of them get recycled. 5% will travel out in the poo. People who have bile acid malabsorption have a problem normally with reabsorbing those bile salts. So you have too many bile salts hitting the large intestine, and that causes watery urgent diarrhea because they're very irritating to the gut lining in the colon. They draw water in so your body can wash it out. It wants to get rid of it because it's almost like burning. And this is what a lot of people with bile acid malabsorption get, is terrible pains because you've got this bile acid irritating the lining of your gut, and the diarrhea that comes is very urgent. I'm working with somebody who's been going to the toilet more than 10 times a day before their bile acid diarrhea was properly treated by their doctor. It's something that can lead to incontinence, leakage or seepage, and is also very painful, and it's very disorientating because you don't know what's going on. SIBO, or small intestine bacterial overgrowth, is one of the reasons you may not be absorbing the bile salts again, because the microbes there interfere with the bile acid reabsorption, and so then more of them are hitting the colon. So there's a real interplay between SIBO and bile acid diarrhea. They really kind of get into a negative cycle. The way that bile acid malabsorption is mostly treated is through taking a type of medication called bile acid sequestrants, which absorbs and binds to the bile salts and then excretes them from the gut. So your doctor will be able to tell you whether that's appropriate for you, because there are some people who it doesn't suit. It doesn't stop you making bile, but it stops it being reabsorbed. So therefore it is going to impact on the levels of cholesterol in your body, and for some people can lead to increased triglycerides. That's a type of fat in the blood. So it is really important that it suits you, and that's why a doctor needs to prescribe it. But there are different types, and some people have a sachet that you can mix with a yogurt or drink or something can down before a meal, or sometimes people take capsules, and either way it's binding the bile salts, taking them out. Now that will help if you have bile salts that are not being reabsorbed. If you want more information about how to manage that bile acid malabsorption, or BAM, then listen to episode 52, which is a whole episode dedicated to that. But I really wanted to talk today about slow bile production and what happens when you get sludgy bile. There can be many problems with bile flow, and some of it may be down to the viscosity of the bile, so how thick is it and how fast is it flowing. You can also, of course, get problems making the bile. Maybe you're not creating enough. You can also have problems in bile ducts, so either cysts or polyps or things that can slow the flow of bile from the gallbladder into the small intestine, or from the liver into the gallbladder where the bile will be stored. So there are plenty of reasons why you could get slowing of the bile flow. Some of them can be down to these structural changes, so things that are blocking the flow, but you can also get particles and thickness in the bile, like calcium salts, that can thicken from staying in the gallbladder for a long time. It becomes sludgy, and then you just get this slow moving liquid which is quite hard to move along. This can in time develop to things like gallstones, where you're getting calcium deposits or bits of cholesterol that kind of bundle together, form little lumps in the bile, and then this can create problems, can create blockages or just real irritation in your gallbladder. So often what people feel with this is a very sharp, very urgent pain, particularly underneath your right side of your body under the ribs. You might get chest pain radiating through to the back, like your whole shoulder might be aching and seizing up, as well as like pain so bad you feel like vomiting. I know from speaking to people who've experienced it, it's like very severe kind of pain. Gallstones can be a little bit more common in people who have lost a lot of weight very quickly, or pregnancy as well as another time. And I'm going to talk a bit more about the hormone impact on bile flow in a moment. So gallstones is like a really extreme problem where you have actual lumps in the bile which is going to be obstructing the flow. But much more common than that, I think, is slow flowing bile that actually isn't at the stage where it's into stones, but it's just too thick to move effectively and can still cause issues for the rest of your digestive system. This is sometimes called cholestasis, and it's just like slow flowing bile. This is more likely to cause problems with fat malabsorption, which could lead to diarrhea and cramping. You can see how this could easily be confused with people who have diarrhea predominant IBS, because essentially you are having very similar symptoms as somebody who has IBS-D. You might feel a bit nauseous, you might have quite light coloured stools because of the fat malabsorption, so things going through you quite quickly can lead to orangey or yellowy stools. People who have real problems with their bile will often see clay coloured or light greyish coloured poo, and that is down to the high levels of fat in there, and also potentially the reduced level of bilirubin, which is coming from the liver, which would normally be in the bile. The fast transit time can lead to problems with feeling fatigued because you're maybe getting low in some key nutrients due to the fast moving diarrhea, and also the other symptoms could be abdominal pain and just feeling very run down. Bile is also important for our gut motility, and so some people who are constipated also have a problem with slow flowing bile. Bile acid metabolism is really also important for people who have slow transit time. This may be down to the overgrowth in microbes that produce methane, so IMO, intestinal methanogen overgrowth, which can be very common in constipation. So if you have a slow transit time, you've got more time for these methane producing microbes to grow. Methane slows down your transit time. So again, you get stuck in this vicious cycle. But bile is a bit of a motility agent. So it does actually help to keep the gut moving. It is a kind of natural laxative. And also some people who react to high fat diets with slowing of transit time may find that getting their bile moving again actually helps to get their motility up. Sign of slow flowing bile is, well, ultimately becoming jaundiced. So you're getting a yellowish tint to your skin, your eyes may be going a little bit yellow, and this is down to a buildup of bile in your blood. But this is obviously a more extreme case. But one thing I did want to mention is sometimes one of the signs of slow, sludgy bile can be really itchy skin. And that is something also that happens to some women in menopause. It could be down to slow bile flow. It could also be down to reduction in estrogen, which can affect the barrier of the skin and affect oil production in the skin. So we can sometimes get itchy skin that can be related to bile flow, but it might also just be down to low estrogen. Also, though, we know high estrogen can decrease bile flow. So high estrogen can increase your cholesterol levels and slow down the bile flow because it becomes thicker. This can also impact on your gallbladder. So we know that women are more likely to have gallstones, and maybe there's a hormonal element to that as well. It's also potentially why women are more likely to get cholestasis during pregnancy, and hormone replacement therapy or taking the pill, taking replacement hormones in any form may affect your bile flow. So something for you to think. Menopause or changing hormone levels, that can definitely be one of the causes of changes to your bile flow. Also, we know that high cholesterol or high levels of blood lipids, fats in your blood, may also affect bile flow. So it can be down to diet and lifestyle. Typically, people who are overweight are more likely to have gallstones. So that is a factor as well, is lifestyle and the amount of fat in your body. But we also know there can be problems with your liver. This might be down to liver damage, potentially things like hepatitis, liver injuries, but also fatty liver disease that can come from high alcohol use that can impair your liver's production of bile. This can massively impact on bile flow. So we want to think about your liver health, think about your hormones and how they might be affecting your digestion, and also your overall lifestyle when we're thinking about what you can do about this. In terms of a diet, one of the best things is to eat a good, healthy, balanced diet. As with all things, it is helpful for most conditions to eat a broad range of good plant-based fibres. So lots of different fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, pulses. Try and get in your high levels of fibre every day. And the reason for that is to try to bind to any excess bile acids to help excrete them. So when you've got a lot of bile that could be sludgy in your digestive tract, you may find that some of the bile is not being reabsorbed. Even if you've got slow bile coming out of the gallbladder into the intestines, not all of that might be being reabsorbed, or perhaps there's a problem with your liver making it, and so your body doesn't want to keep reabsorbing it and sending it back to the liver because the liver can't cope with it. So therefore, more and more of it will be excreted in your poo and maybe irritating you. So this is why a high fibre diet will help to bind to some of those excessive bile salts and excrete them from the body. Soluble fibre is particularly good in this instance. Things like oats, flax seeds, chia seeds, apples, they really help to take things out. You might even think about psyllium husk or PHGG, which is partially hydrolyzed guar gum. These are generally really well tolerated and good for constipation and diarrhea type symptoms. If we're thinking about bile flow as well, we just want to make sure that you are hydrated enough. Obviously, you want enough liquid for all your digestive functions to work properly, like production of stomach acid, but bile flow would certainly be one of them because a large component of that is water. So yes to water and staying hydrated. Teas that can also support bile flow include dandelion teas. So this is called a cholagogue. These are types of foods that help to stimulate bile flow. Other food types or substances that do this as well include artichoke, dandelion root or like dandelion leaves, also good. Turmeric and also milk thistle is very good for supporting the health of your liver. So milk thistle is a herb. You can often buy this in little drops that you put into water, which is sometimes what I like recommending to clients. There's a really nice one that's mixed with some artichoke and other herbs. The best bit about milk thistle is that it's called silly bum, which I think is really funny, but also quite silly. So those are things that can help you stimulate bile flow. If you're thinking about, just general liver health and how to keep your liver healthy, then we also want to think about antioxidants and phytochemicals, like phytonutrients from dark coloured vegetables. So you might have heard me talking before about really antioxidant rich things like berries, citrus fruit, kale, spinach, beetroot. These are all really good to help the liver with the right nutrients that it needs in order to carry out all its different processes. So really helpful. Also those antioxidants that give the plant their colour, they're really helpful for us to support the immune system, just support our dealing with free radicals like the toxins that just come from daily life, but also our exposure to the world around us. So really helpful to have a high antioxidant diet, and that is all coming from fresh fruits and vegetables. You might also want to think about your dietary fat intake. Now, for people who have had their gallbladder removed, you can still have problems with sludgy bile, and you can still have problems with bile acid malabsorption. Just because you haven't got the gallbladder to store the bile, you may still have problems with bile flow. And this is what some people miss a little bit. And they think, oh, well, I've had the gallbladder out, so what you're not going to get is gallstones because the gallbladder's gone. But you can still have problems with bile flow. This means you can still have problems with too much bile that is not getting absorbed, or not enough bile that's also adding to your symptoms. So it's hard to know and hard to say because each person's quite different, but we do want to make sure we're eating a healthy level of fats, but avoiding high fats. So look for things that are common in the Mediterranean diet. These are things like olive oil, avocado, oily fish, nuts and seeds. These are really good polyunsaturated fats, monounsaturated fats, very good for our heart health and cardiovascular system. So obviously we don't want to have hugely fatty meals, particularly if you have had your gallbladder removed, because a big fatty meal is going to overwhelm your body's ability to process those fats and emulsify them, because your bile flow might be too slow. So this is where sometimes for people who are dealing with slow bile or even bile acid malabsorption, you want to monitor and manage your fat intake to your own personal tolerance level. But certainly the fats that you'd want to cut back on would be processed fats, high fatty cuts of meat. These might be harder to digest if your bile flow is reduced, especially high fat foods like fish and chips, those kind of meals where it's very low fibre, very high fat, high carbohydrate. If your doctor suspects that you might have a problem with your bile flow, there is a medication that you can take that encourages bile flow. It's called ursodeoxycholic acid, or UDCA. Now, you can also find something that is a supplement that is called TUDCA, which is the UDCA with taurine attached to it. I don't necessarily suggest people go off and try this without a practitioner working who really knows what they're doing, because sometimes we don't want more bile flow. And if you've got bile acid malabsorption and you don't have a sluggish bile and you start stimulating your bile flow, that could give you negative consequences, rather, the opposite of what you want, basically. But that is an option for some people, and certainly your doctor could talk to you about UDCA. To sum up this episode, thinking about what we've covered today, you can get bile acid malabsorption. That is a problem with bile salts getting to your large intestine, irritating the large intestine, most commonly associated with diarrhoea, urgency, watery stools, and potentially incontinence, but also cramps and abdominal pain. That is one problem that can be linked to SIBO. It can be linked to other damage to your small intestine. Then I've also talked about sludgy bile and how slow moving bile may be a contributing factor to constipation because it's part of the motility activators. So without good bile flow, you may have slow digestion. That can then lead to an overgrowth of methane producing microbes, which we call intestinal methanogen overgrowth, or we used to call methane, SIBO. Then you may also be getting the opposite of that. So actually slow moving bile may be causing diarrhoea, and that is due to the lack of bile salts to emulsify your fats. So you have high levels of fat in the small intestine causing you diarrhoea and fast transit time, and you may see things like very light coloured stools, like greyish. You may experience nausea, diarrhoea, as I said, and cramping, bloating as well. And then also slow sludgy bile may be contributing to SIBO overgrowth because it's an antimicrobial action in the gut, and it's also going to affect your motility. So I hope you've got from this that bile is really essential to our gut, and it does not get talked about half enough. People who've got SIBO, people who've got IBS should really know about bile and be thinking about it. If you want help with your diet and digestion, do send me a message about working with me in my 3-month gut reset, where I can give you personalised information and support to actually change your diet for the better, get control of your IBS symptoms so that you can get back to living the life you want to live without worrying about sitting on the toilet too long because nobody wants to spend more time in the bathroom than they have to. If you don't already, please hit the subscribe button and follow my podcast so that you make sure you get every episode when it's released. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Inside Knowledge. Better digestion for everyone.